Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm so happy that you all took some time out of your lunch hour during Teacher Appreciation Week. I'm sure you're all super busy. This is the first part of a three-part webinar series that we'll be holding. Hey, Mike, from BOCES. Glad you could be here. My name is Jamie Guidry. I'm the Educator Success Manager at Robo Wunderkind, also a former educator, serving in various roles and capacities for a little over 10 years. And I will be your host today. Some housekeeping before we begin. The webinar is being recorded. So you can be on camera, please, but feel free to stay on mute. Put your questions that you might have along the way in the chat. I do have someone moderating the chat. They'll let me know when there are questions. We'll try to answer them along the way, as well as save some time at the end of the webinar to have an open forum for questions and answers. So let's get started. So the reason why we're here is my team and, some teachers and administrators that I've been talking with, we were just thinking about ways that we need to make our product and STEM in general accessible to all students. So we met Miss Michellea Millis Rucker, and I'm so pleased that she is here today. Hi, Michellea.
Hello, everyone. So excited to be here.
So Michellea has an extensive resume. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I'm actually an educator like Jamie over 20 plus years. I stopped counting at 20, having served as a teacher, administrator, and also an instructional and diversity coach. It was actually when I was in a instructional role working with 7th through 12th graders that we had the opportunity to hear about the STEM job opportunities in our community, which is San Antonio, Texas area. As many of you may know, we are second to DC for cybersecurity, so STEM is everywhere and growing exponentially there. BrownSTEM came out of that because many of my students are African American and Latinx students, and they come from communities where they have not had opportunities to STEM at all. And so we have really taken that to really look at underrepresented communities such as rural and urban, and to be able to offer opportunities within their community that help them to build school to career STEM capital. So that's just a little bit about BrownSTEM. I consider myself an edupreneur, so an educator and an entrepreneur, because I think you have to have entrepreneurial spirit and thought to do this work, and also a BIPOC STEM advocate and activist.
Wow, thank you, Michellea. Again, I'm grateful that you all joined us today. The reason we are here today is because we at Robo Wunderkind are on a mission to make STEM accessible for all students. So taking a look at the statistics on this slide, you can see this is really important work that needs to be done, especially looking at those PISA rankings. US is 24th. And if you're not familiar, that's an assessment that really measures students' ability to apply the science, math, and reading skills and knowledge to real world problems, right? So we are really lagging in that area. Many districts are beginning that work to implement STEM programs and be more inclusive, but we're not always successful, right? So we wanted to ask ourselves, which is a question that many of you are probably asking in your districts, is, how can we do this work? What are the pillars of a successful and accessible STEM program? Okay, we interviewed more than 50 administrators, STEM administrators, and more than 10 experts in the field. Okay, and what we learned is that, and what our conclusion was, our major takeaway, is that the earlier students have a positive experience with STEM, the more likely they are to pursue STEAM education in career pathways. And that's why we have Michellea here today. So Michellea, what I'm going to ask you to do is talk about those keywords that I've highlighted, the earlier and positive, and then share with us what are those in your experience and from your expertise, what are those pillars that administrators should be aware of?
Yeah, so earlier is a key word in that I actually, in my experience, have worked with secondary students, so middle and high school students. But if we can get young people, especially marginalized communities, to get that exposure way before them, and then begin to really build supportive cultures and supports for them, then it builds that positive exposure. Many of the students that I work with had not had a positive exposure to STEM. For example, some of the young girls that I work with, by the time they got to middle school, they did not like math or science. And it was because they were told when they asked for help from a teacher or mentor, et cetera, oh, it's okay. You don't have to do that. You can go do something else, go do art or go do music. And so when you then begin to enculturate them, meaning give them exposure into STEM, there's a lot of resistance because they've had that negative exposure built up prior. So the earlier you can start pre-K, et cetera, to do that. Because it never worked. Sorry, I thought I heard somebody talking. The earlier you can bring that positiveness by providing support, encouragement, the more likely they will begin to say, I actually want to be a biochemist as a career.
You know what, Michellea, I was one of those girls. I remember distinctly struggling and being given a piece of paper and some markers to, do something different while everyone else worked on that. But I'm better at math now. Okay, so these pillars, let's jump in. 5 foundations of effective STEM programs. Go for it.
Yeah, so these are 5 foundational pillars that I think when you think about programming for STEM, you should consider. So make it relatable. It has to be authentic to those students where they see themselves there. One thing that I love to say is if they can see it, they can be it. So make it relatable for them. Incorporate student voice and participation. Anytime you have the opportunity to have students be a part of the process, not just a byproduct of that process, then they will definitely buy in and it'll become important to them. Once again, that's back to the relatable. They go together. Build student confidence. That goes back to the positive experience. If students have not had, in your case, Jamie, you're given a marker and a blank piece of paper, that's not building a confidence. It's almost saying, you can't do this, so we're just going to kind of push you to do something else. Find out what they need for support and build that confidence. Create capacity through culture. So especially for marginalized communities, you need to have mentors, subject matter experts who look like the very students you serve, because now they relate that culturally for them. And then foster teacher collaboration. Here, we need to have teachers get support about how they're able to make the programming, once again, where student confidence is being built, it's relatable, there's a capacity through culture, and then incorporating student voice and participation. So that's a high level view. We're hoping today to kind of get into some of these and filter it down, and hopefully hear from you and the audience that's participating today.
Awesome. Okay. Wow. So it sounds like they can't really exist in silos, right? All of these things play a part with and are integrated with one another. Pause for one moment. Somebody asked in the question if it will be possible to view the recording. Absolutely, we are recording this and it will be distributed as well. So, but Michellea, yes, so all of this is integrated. No one aspect can exist on its own. So let's talk about the first one, relatability. How you briefly mentioned, having role models. Talk more about that. How relatable is STEM to our students?
Yeah, so I think that when you begin to think about STEM programming, you have to think about from what place are these students coming into this STEM experience, and think about what's going to help it make it relatable to them. I know when we began STEM programming, the first thing that I did was have students actually go out and see STEM, I call them subject matter experts in STEM that look like them. So I had a group of young ladies who actually went to see some women of color, Latinx and African American who have STEM backgrounds, and actually talk to them. And I think part of that is that those young ladies prior to that, when we did the brief, when we came back, said, I didn't even know that there was somebody who looked like me who wore a lab coat, or who was part of this, NASA, or who, was the inventor of this in the STEM world or in the tech field. And so when we talk about relatability, we have to make sure that it looks like them, because many of them have not seen anyone that looks like them in those fields. And so then they begin to think it's not something that I can attain. It's not relatable to me.
Right. I agree. Something we started a few years back, our school became a STEM school, and we ended up creating a database, reaching out to our parents and finding out who are the experts. So that way we could bring those folks in, whether it was virtually, during COVID, virtually or in person, those in-school field trips where we invited someone in. And the impact those experiences had on those students was amazing. Then they were saying, oh, when I grew up, you have the typical, I want to be a police officer, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a teacher. But that exposure just opened up their world to different possibilities, right?
Exactly. And I think the other point to be made is that often folks that I've talked to in the STEM community is that, oh, it's difficult for me to find subject matter experts that are of color. You have folks right around you every day. You may not realize. Use your community networks to reach out. Think of the colleges, think of the entrepreneurs, think of the schools. Folks may have some, I'm a teacher of this. My husband, for instance, my husband's a retired engineer. So I used him. I volunteered him when we were working with students. So, but he was right here within my network. So don't feel like you have to go far out to get folks. They're right around you.
That takes me to the next question, because they are right around you. You said also that we have to include students in the design process. They are right there. That is a valuable resource, right? That also means we have to allow teachers, right? We have to allow teachers and give them, empower them to release some of that work to students, which I know can be difficult. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the things I want to share is that when I began to do research for my pilot for BrownSTEM, I actually did something called empathy interviews, which interviews those who are the participants of the program. So in this case, it was middle and high school students, and I was not surprised by their answers, but I was surprised that I hadn't done this sooner, because they were really guiding the design of the program. Traditionally, programs are built in silos with adults, youth minded, but it's not usually done with the youth actually saying, here's what would work for me, here's what I need for support. And since the program is for them, we really need to involve them. We even go as far as having youth on our board. Mostly high school students, might be a little bit more difficult for the younger ones, but it might be a way that you can regularly get feedback from them and get their input. And we also are working on what we call participatory community research, where the students actually design the programming with just adults facilitating that process. So there's a lot of different ways you can get student voice, even as young as kindergarten, by, doing some regular check-ins and just asking them, if you were, in this program in their language, of course, language appropriate, age appropriate, you can really garner a lot of data to be able to make the program so that it's student designed and they're part of the process.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say for those that feel that that might impose on time that to teach things that are going to be tested, basically, right? Does that take away from, time for that core curriculum instruction?
I think that my approach as an educator is that everything you do is part of the core curriculum instruction. So as young people are actually, being part of that process, they're learning those hard skills because it may be math and science specific, but also the soft skills of presentation, team building. And so I think that we just have to begin as educators thinking differently on how something is taking away from, but how it's actually bridging it or allowing young people to actually get saturated into that work.
Yeah. No, I agree. I just wanted to ask because that is often a question I receive when I'm talking with teachers in the classroom, right? As administrators, and we know that those things are necessary, but sometimes teachers don't feel that they have the ability to do that. So,
and if I could add, Jamie, to that, if the teachers don't feel like they have that ability, then bring those subject matter experts into your classroom. I'm not a science or math background. That's not my major, et cetera. I was excited about it, of course. But I had folks who were willing, bending over backwards. It's maybe an hour of their time, come on in, and they talk to young people. I always ask it to be experiential, so they're not just talking to them, but actually engaging them in whatever it is, a project or something they can do right then. And you can begin to see all the math, the science, English, et cetera, all being built into that session while learning about STEM, and then building that interest, that natural, authentic interest with the young people.
I was muted.
Yeah, you're back.
Any questions for Michellea so far? I will have time for questions at the end, but feel free if you think of something, maybe throw your hand up so that we're not just talking at you. I want you to be included here. You did say how everything kind of goes together, and we talked about relatability. So I think my next question is related. How can educators help build the confidence in STEM? We talked about, having role models, et cetera. Let's talk more about the confidence.
Yeah, I think when we talk about confidence, if you really know your students, you can begin to see what they need to build that. So don't just automatically assume they're going to need X. Ask, right? Confidence comes from when students are able to say, this is what I need. And then we, as the educators, being able to provide that. So if a student says, hey, I need help with math and science, see if there's a way you can provide tutoring support to be able to do that. I think the other thing when it comes to confidence is exposure. We become more confident when we have a lot, I like to call that bats. How many times to be able to touch it, feel it, get our senses involved in it, to actually be curious and ask questions, to then find some way to engage in our community with it. Often in BrownSTEM, we try to find community projects that are STEM related. So our students actually are working hand in hand with community partners to build in their own community that they live in. That builds confidence. And so I think that when teachers begin to think about how do I build confidence, know your students, know what they need by asking and trying to see if you can meet those needs, and then being able to provide some way that they can have exposure and experience with that particular STEM endeavor that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think also we need to acknowledge and nurture, their strengths, right? Not just where they have challenges and trying to meet them where they are, but when we see that, oh, maybe Sally struggles with math, but loves science or whatever it is, but really focusing on their strengths and nurturing those as well. Because what adult doesn't like when somebody says, hey, look at Jamie, she does this really well, right? We all love that. And so I think doing that in the classroom creates that culture we talked about in that healthy risk taking and allowing them to think outside the box.
Yeah, Jamie, and if I can add to that, I think that when you talk about strengths-based, which you were just talking about, it's okay for educators to set up a safe space for failure also, right? That builds confidence when students feel like I don't have to be perfect at this. And it's okay because I'm going to try again and build on that. That also adds to a growth mindset that in the STEM work world you will have. There's a lot of prototyping that goes in the STEM field, especially if you're creating something new or new. And so being able to have that as part of the culture of I'm strong in this, but I can also fail and improve and grow, also builds sort of that strength space on both sides.
So I do have a question in the chat. Thank you, Lori. How do we help teachers feel comfortable doing STEM activities in the classroom to make it more accessible?
Yeah, that's a good question. Lori, right?
Yes.
Her name? Yeah, sorry, I'm not looking at chat. But yeah, Lori, I think that's a great question. I think one of the things is try to find folks that feel comfortable already within your teaching network to work alongside. This doesn't have to be done in silos. Maybe do co-teaching, right? You have somebody who's strong in it, and then the teacher wants to still be part of it. They can work together. The other thing is bringing those subject matter experts in to work with teachers hand in hand. Another co-teaching model, just different with folks from out in the community. Of course, you'd have to do some prep work together for them to understand the classroom part, but that's where your teachers come in. So there's a lots of different ways. I just think outside of what you have there and see where you can bring the community in, subject matter experts in, other folks, and then maybe somebody that's right there within the building that has that background and that you're willing to do that co-teaching model.
I like that you said co-teaching, because often when we want to build capacity for teachers, we stick them in a PD. We stick them in a room with other folks that don't know either. Right. And that natural interaction and the real application is really key in building the capacity for those teachers.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other part of it is the other thing is when you have folks come out to teach someone something, sometimes it's seen as I don't have it within me. And I do believe within our educational communities, it's within there, or we know someone. And that builds more credibility with the peer-to-peer learning, as opposed to saying, oh, I had to go get someone who was, a whole nother state, et cetera, to come in, where that is once again relying on our strengths within our education communities. I did see Lori say she loved the community piece. When I started out as an educator, I don't remember seeing anybody from my community. And I was really fortunate that my first teaching experience was working in a district I graduated from. So I knew all the parents, pretty much the students, the community really well. And I often wondered, how come we don't have community persons come in with our young people? And so I think anytime you can incorporate that, it does a lot of different things for building that confidence. Again, we're talking about Jamie because it's within their home, right here at home. And then also it bridges the gap between school and community, which is something that we need to do to get students closer to the real world applications.
Yeah. Ooh, you said a lot. You said a lot. And, we said that they can't happen in silos. So I guess with our group here, I'd want us to think about, tying it all together. We've got to think about our relatability, building the confidence, creating this culture. But when I'm talking with folks, it sounds like there's a disconnect between what teachers can do and what admin can do, and maybe those higher up in the district. Let's tie it all together for my final question, which is, what are ways that districts as a whole, some of the folks that are here, maybe, things that they can take back to their teams so that they can create and increase their STEM opportunities and accessibility?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to think about how are districts going about increasing STEM opportunities, period. So have you done some empathy interviews to even find out if students are interested in STEM? And if they are, to what level, to what extent? And then if you can give some particulars, like you have some students that say, I really would like to just explore STEM through robotics or through a cyber patriot club or different avenues, then you can begin to partner with community organizations, nonprofits. There's a lot of those out here that really want to just be able to, a lot with no cost, partner with schools because they want to be able to give the students that access. So start with what I think young people want and then grow from there. If you're able to financially do something large, partner with a company. Robo Wonderkin is one, and other ones that can really begin to come in because that's their expertise and work with you collaboratively to really build out your specific program. Because I want people to know that we believe STEM is everywhere and everything, but it looks differently in your community with your students. And so you want to make sure whoever you partner with that you can do that personalization and specifics for what your young people need. That includes the supports, that includes your mentors, that includes whatever the teachers need to make sure they're up to speed and have the confidence themselves to be able to go in and lead this type of initiative. So there's those ways that I've seen that actually have worked for districts that are trying to implement STEM programming.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the empathy surveys and attitude surveys. Is that just, would you just say Google that, or is there one in particular or that you would suggest that we use?
Yeah, so the empathy interviews, actually, you can Google them, but you can really create your own. I did find out about empathy interviews through a fellowship that I was participating in. And then I found out this is something that's done all the time. It's not a new thing.
Right.
And then when I created it, I created my own questions. And so there's samples out there on the net that you can find. And then I think when you're talking about attitude surveys, there's lots of those out there on the net also that you can find. But feel free to tailor it to what you need, what you're trying to get, the data that you're trying to get from the young people. You might even want to have your young people, especially if they're, I would say, secondary, middle, and high school, actually help you craft some of those questions because you want to get to a certain thing and align it to what students' needs.
So you did just totally take it back to the second pillar, which was including students in the design process. Okay. This is great. This is great. For those of you in the meeting, if you have any questions or comments thus far, you can throw them in the chat or just come off of mute. I think this is a great starting point, for those of us, those of you that are just beginning this work. It's also a great time to reflect. If you've already started implementing something, some type of STEM programming or computer science or, all of that, if you've already begun that work, this is a nice pause point to just reflect and say, okay, have we been doing this, or what things can we do better or should be doing better? Just listening to you, I'm like, oh, did I actually, I remember doing, interest surveys at the beginning of the school year to find out like what genre of books kids like, but I don't know that I actually included some of those other things that really could have provided a lot of information. that I could have used to identify and nurture some of those strengths in creating that STEM culture. Okay.
Yeah, Jamie, that's a great point that you mentioned STEM culture, because you have to nurture it. Nurture it and sustain those things that are actually going to build that culture. It's when you start doing STEM programming, depending on if those students have had exposure, if and what exposure have they had, what's the programming, is depending on the age group, what type of programming. Is it being done in a classroom? Is it being done as an after school program or out of school time? There's a lot of different variables when you think about STEM programming. And so it constantly, has to be nurtured and cultivated so that it's on a continuum of success. Don't feel that it's taken us a lot of time. I started in maybe 2017, and I'm still cultivating and nurturing, because it takes a lot, because you have to think about if these students, the young people that we specifically work with at BrownSTEM, have not had any exposure to STEM. So it takes a long time to be able to get those small wins to get to the larger wins. And I want folks in the audience to know that it's okay if, for instance, this year we partnered with a great program called Technovation, and literally we only had one student. It happens. Next year we're expecting more, but you have to remember the challenges of working with, in our case, underserved communities that have not had exposure. And so transportation, how do we get them there? The school originally said they were willing to do it, but then things changed and they had their schedule changed, so we weren't able to push in. All those different considerations go into it, but they're not impossible. You just have to start somewhere, as you're saying, to kick it off and build and cultivate and nurture that culture.
Yeah. And you mentioned after school programs and whatnot, and that even opens up a whole can of worms on accessibility, the clubs, and whether it's just after school, like, does everybody go to after school? Not everyone goes to after school programs, so those kiddos might get something that the other children may not get. Wow, we've got a lot of work to do. But I would like to open up to the audience. I'm going to create a word cloud. I would like you to, in the chat, take one or two words, okay? Because, creating this accessibility is beyond the scope of the classroom teachers, okay? So we have to have, administrators, district folks that are working on removing these barriers, okay? So what are some takeaways? One or two words. Oops, I'm sorry, excuse me, one moment. Trying to get to my, okay. One or two words in the chat that encapsulate the learning for the pillars of successful and accessible STEM program. All right, we'll place that in the chat. You can take a moment to think, okay? Really reflect, because these are really talking points for you to take back to your team. Maybe reflect in your own practice. And I am creating our word cloud as you type, so give me a moment. And if, Michellea, if you can look, and if you see it stop, like that no more responses are coming in, just give me a high sign. Ooh, that's a good one. Empathy. Yes. Culture, community, sharing.
Oh, still have another person. Okay, great. Lori just added one. I was just gonna say I hadn't seen one for uh a minute, but then she added. Great. And it's a great one. Impact.
In
Yes.
okay. So what I'm going to do is
Now she just added representation. Still getting them coming in. Okay, great.
all right, I'll keep going. Representation. I love that we are present and we're, really reflecting on how we can grow in our practice.
Lori said learning. She says she can
I
go
can
on
go
and on and
on
on.
and
She's
on.
fired up about it. I love it. Love
Yeah,
it.
I love it too. So I am going to take over the share for a moment. I'm going to share my screen so that we can see. Let's see. More. And because we have, just a few. So this is a large working space I have here. But let's see here. Okay, I have, can you all see that? Word cloud. Unbiased, I saw, inclusion, community. So let's look at the top 5, right? Community, collaboration, accessible, role models, and exposure. What do you think, Michellea? Do we
I
have
think,
the is this what you
yeah,
wanted us to take away?
I'm so excited to see that because it is about community. It is about coming out of our silos to collaborate, making it accessible to every student, no matter what supports they need. Giving them those role models, especially those that look like them, that's going to increase it. And then providing exposure to STEM on a regular basis. So I'm so glad that those were illuminated from the word cloud, those words.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that activity. I do see that I am out of questions, and so it looks like we're going to finish up a little bit early. Um, does anyone have questions that they would like to ask? And what's the wait time? Is it 8 seconds? All right, then we will move on. I will say that the webinar was sponsored by Robo Wonderkin. Who we are is a team of engineers, educators, entrepreneurs, edupreneurs that have created a STEM program to really help schools create 21st century schools. We ignite student curiosity for STEAM. We use story-based play. My role is to do that co-teaching piece that you talked about, Michellea, modeling for teachers and building that capacity that way, so that they can integrate STEAM into any subject area. And then, of course, working with you all, your district leaders, so that you can build that STEAM ecosystem. So that's who we are. And I'm just grateful that, we ran into you to help us with this work. I think it's important and it's powerful. Be on the lookout for the next session for our series. We'll be posting it everywhere, so you won't be able to miss it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Take care, everyone.